tools in OneNote. Right now it is small, and right now I'm going to make it nice and big for us. Alrighty, cool. So again, my name is Victoria Thompson. I am really excited to be here with y'all today. I'm always excited to be here with the Special Education Technology Center. I mean, y'all are some of my favorite people to work with. I am on Twitter at Victoria the Tech. That is that handle where you can find me. My dog makes a lot of special guest appearances. He's usually in this room, but he's sleeping right now. I think he's a little tired from his bark and breakfast since we just got back from where we were for our conference and also closing on our new home. So he's chilling in the other room, but I am here right now as VI Thompson at Microsoft.com, and that is where you can find my Microsoft contact information and also where you can ask me questions. Again, I am very friendly, so please don't be a stranger and let me know what I can do to assist you. Okay, let's talk a little bit about how I kind of ended up in this space, because as was mentioned, I was full-time in schools and classrooms, but now I'm at Microsoft. So I always think it's a little important just to give some context. I am a proud product of New Jersey K-12 public education. I was born and raised in Marlton, New Jersey. That is about 15 minutes outside of Charleston's, sorry, not Charleston, South Carolina. That's where I went to college, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. Southern New Jersey is where I'm from. On top of that as well, so I went to college in Charleston, South Carolina for my bachelor's degree, got my master's degree shortly after. And when I was in the classroom, I was kind of figuring out a lot of things with STEM. I was the STEM girl, but because I was the youngest person on the hall, a lot kind of defaulted to me because they automatically assumed that because I was the youngest, I knew how to do stuff. So that's how a lot of this came about. I am very techie, but I also know that I need to give myself the grace to understand how to use the tools and know how these tools are being implemented. So that's how I really got really invested with technology. I currently live in the Seattle area. Currently is the operative word. As I mentioned, we just got back from Florida. We are closing on our home in the Orlando area. And hopefully Hurricane Ann doesn't do, fingers crossed, a ton of damage, but it looks like we'll be in the clear. So again, fingers crossed. My current role at Microsoft is that as an education industry executive. So when I taught in South Carolina, I was all about STEM and the tech. When we moved over to Washington State, I was driving math curriculum and also tech initiatives at a private independent school. And then I guess things were working out so well that a company plucked me and said, hey, you do this for one school, you want to help us do it for 5? So I essentially did the STEM integration and was a STEM coach. So an instructional coach focused on just STEM for 5 schools in Washington, primarily focusing on one site. So I did that. And then once this opportunity came up at Microsoft, I decided, hey, let's throw our hat in the ring. And now instead of 5 schools, I do cover 23 states. So that is my background. I am very conscious also about how I appear outside of work. So I'm a Walt Disney World pass holder, as you can tell. I have a very Disney Parks themed home office. I call this the happiest or the most magical office on earth, since that's Disney World's tag. And since I'm moving to Orlando, that's perfect for me. And on top of that, I love bread, cooking and baking. I just love that intersectionality between, like cooking and literacy for kids. I think it makes it very tangible for them. But that is more than enough about me. Let's talk a little bit about math. And when I first created this session, I really leaned into what I heard from my colleagues, where it was so challenging for them sometimes to conceptualize how students view math versus how we view math as adults. A lot of the math that we do as adults, it's practical math or math that we're teaching other people. If I'm balancing a budget, if I'm calculating how much I'm getting paid, right? Like that's kind of what we do as adults to a certain degree. And then with kids, sometimes it gets lost in translation because it's challenging for them sometimes to connect what we do as adults with math versus what they're asked to learn. So I'm going to start there. When I also think about where I want to start, I want to think about what we hear. So that's why I created this slide about what do we hear. It is very, very, very important to figure out what we hear and also how that leads to misconceptions with mathematics. So first and foremost, the number one thing that I hear, period, is that students don't know how to do math. I hear it all the time. They don't know how to do math. She doesn't know how to do math. He doesn't know how to do math. These kids don't know how to do math. Now, while I understand a certain degree to this, because there are times where a student might enter, your fifth grade math classroom on a first grade level. There might also be times where a student enters your Algebra 2 classroom on an Algebra 1 level, or sometimes pre-algebra level. What I'm asking for y'all to consider, and also this is kind of my pushback, is do they not know how to do the math, or do they not know how to do the math on our level that we're asking? That is the big question. Because not knowing how to do math, period, like my dog Ren doesn't know how to do math. But a kid that's on fifth grade math level, or should be, that is doing math on first grade, they know how to do math. They just don't know how to do it on what we're asking for them to do. Another thing that I hear a lot, especially now, like post-COVID, well, we're still in COVID, but you know what I mean. We're in 2022, we're kind of in that phase where people are going back to school, or at least exploring their options, is that students are over-reliant on the free web. I've heard that a lot pre-pandemic, but also especially now that we're in this space where COVID is still very much a thing, and people are looking into options as to figuring out where they want their kids to be for school. That is a concern. They don't want kids just going to every single website to kind of see what's available for the answer. Things like Wolfram Alpha, things like Photomath. A lot of educators are terrified because they're trying to figure out how the technology is intersectional with what they're doing. Because if a kid, quite frankly, does go to Photomath for all their math problems and gets 100 on every homework assignment or quiz or whatever, but then when it comes to something written, they're failing, there's a challenge there. We need to be aware of that. I also hear a lot that students get frustrated with the math process and that they, quite frankly, give up. And I've seen this firsthand. I think we've all kind of been in that space where we see it. And when I think about getting frustrated, the frustration comes from maybe not knowing the tools and the resources to help. So my goal today, hopefully, is that y'all will walk out with tools and resources. That way you can see what's available there. And then the last part, which again, I think we've all heard, is that students don't have the prerequisite knowledge or skills, and they're coming in unprepared for the math class. I have been a direct recipient of this feedback when I was a teacher. I had kids that were coming into Algebra 2, not Algebra 2 ready, kids coming into geometry, not geometry ready. But again, our job as an educator is not to say, that's wrong, you're wrong. Our job is to say, how can we see what's going on here, and what can we do to maybe alleviate that burden? And then, of course, if it's not a good fit, then we can find ways to change that. This is what we hear. And then when I think too about just why I leaned into OneNote when I was in the classroom, when I was a coach, and even now when I do webinars and I work alongside people and I give trainings and I do all these things, there's a lot of emphasis on building current skills. So my role at Microsoft as an education industry executive, the best way that I can describe it is that I am a dedicated resource for any educator, school leader, superintendent, CEO, anybody that just kind of wants to connect on education content. I come from education, as I've described, so a lot of the conversations that I do have are about skills. How do we make sure that, especially in the pandemic phase, we have students that are not only graduating, but contributing in a way that makes sense for them? And a lot of them, quite frankly, do want to go into STEM fields. So when I was just in Florida last week for an event, I was talking a lot about how when I was in school, high school in particular, pre-med and pre-law were the hot majors, so to say. It was right off the heels of the 2008 financial crisis. And I think a lot of my peers were just looking for careers that they thought would give them financial stability. What they found out very quickly was that you can't just show up and say you're pre-med and then graduate being pre-med. Science is work, math is work. We have to work. Sometimes it's hard, and that's okay. What I'm finding now is that the hot major, right, in quotation marks for some folks, is going to be that engineering degree. And having a brother who is a chemical engineer, went to Carnegie Mellon's, engineering school, and is now working in that field, he didn't just show up and he wanted to be an engineer. He had to build on his skills, and really needed to see what he needed to do to be successful. So there's emphasis within OneNote on building on those skills. There's also emphasis on what I refer to and what Microsoft refers to as future ready skills. Now, future ready is always changing, but what we can at least do is figure out what the skills are. That way we can get you to really honestly from point A to point B. So if you want to be an engineer, you can't just show up and be an engineer. Let's maybe take higher level math and science. Let's get you connected with a mentor. Let's attend some student webinars, things like that. So OneNote has capabilities that way, even though we're not 100%, because OneNote can't schedule a meeting with an industry professional for you. But what it can do is give you practice, give a collaborative space for y'all to work, things like that, future ready. It also helps to create that meaningful content connection for students in ways where if they're not really into the subject, but they're interested in it, it does give that content connection. And my personal favorite is that it does show what I refer to as a different type of math. It shows collaborative math. It shows ways for students to be able to work together. It shows math vocabulary. It shows math steps, ways for different types of math in quotations to be shown. My apologies. And then when I take a look at the giving opportunities for students to become independent in mathematics, it is just so great to have that gradual release of responsibility, especially when we take a look at high school and middle school. Elementary, of course, to a degree, but I do find that elementary is more of like that hands-on concrete. But I've seen like at second grade level, that interaction within the tools in OneNote. And when I think about how this also grows what we have here, there's a lot of different ways that math tools do teach us as educators how math is important. There's a lot on this slide, and I know that y'all are going to get the recording. I'm not going to go over all of it. But for me, the big two are, if we go to the first row, the middle, and to the right. Media literacy is every department's responsibility. And there are more ways to engage students than just one. So often in mathematics, this is the algorithm, this is how you do it, give me the results. Or the opposite is there are so many ways for students to solve problems that they get overwhelmed. And they look and they think, I don't even know how I'm going to solve. I think of when I was teaching 5th grade math in South Carolina, the assessments that were given to us that we were modifying, because we actually went to district and said, hey, is this okay? Please solve this problem using the box method. Please solve this method using the standard algorithm. Please solve, please solve, please solve. Students weren't given agency. And the over-engagement, if I were to use that word, because there was so much engagement that when they got the assessment, they were stuck. And then when I also think about that media literacy component, that's also very important. And the reason why is because when we think about OneNote and being able to navigate a platform, they need to be able to see and understand how the technology works for them. This is what it teaches us as educators, because there's more than one way to engage. And also we're being media literate by teaching our kids we can be online in math class. That's really important. And then when I think about how it's important to our kids, it's not just numbers on a screen. Like I give a session on literacy in STEM, and I just gave one last Friday. And I'm also going to be doing one for y'all. And I just gave a big up one for y'all, but we're going to, dive deep even more into that. But a big question I got was, well, then why do I need to do this if maybe I'm doing word problems or if I have numbers and da, 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 da. The big thing really is that math is not just a series of equations. It's also not just a series of numbers. And really, when we lean into these tools, it can be collaborative. We're working with each other. We're problem solving on the go. We have a lot of fun. And a lot of students do report for math to not be their strong suit or fun or vice versa. What we're saying is you belong here. You belong in math class, and this is how you're going to belong. And with student voice and choice and agency, there's a lot of ways that we can also lean into evaluation in a way that is not just Scantrons or word problems or projects. Really, all I want to say here is that flexibility is key. If you want to do a rubric, we can help you with that. If you want to do a grading scale, sliding scale, anything, we can help you with that. If you want to do personal evaluations, which I've done and I'll show you, we can do all of that. But eventually what it comes down to is it's not just numbers and not just a written test. There's so much more to math that OneNote can bring to life. And I'm really excited to show you what that looks like. So speaking of that showing, I'm going to stop sharing this screen and give me just a moment. And what I'm also going to do is open it up for Q&A if anybody has any questions, because I did just talk a little bit. I want to make sure that y'all's questions are answered. And what I'm going to do is head over to my OneNote. And on top of that too, because my computer does take a minute. I think it still thinks I'm on Eastern time, but that's okay because I've been here for less than 24 hours, so it works. And I'll be sharing in 3, 2, and here we go. Right here. Perfect. Okay, so right now I'm doing everything in an application called OneNote. If you've never used OneNote, I highly recommend. It is absolutely amazing. I actually leaned into OneNote for 2 reasons and 2 reasons alone. The first is going to be the fact that we do have the math tools, but I also want to point out my good buddy Immersive Reader. So I know that this is a math tool session, but y'all are also going to get a sneak in for Immersive Reader. I love, love, love Immersive Reader. If you've never heard of Immersive Reader before, essentially what Immersive Reader does is that it takes your information, translates it, has it read aloud, all of those fun things in multiple languages, and also has a picture dictionary, line focus. I'm going to demo all these things, but what I'm telling y'all really is that if we want families to also be involved in the math process. So with the math process, if you've got families that might be wondering how they can help their students, what's going on, how they can be supportive. Again, I hear a lot about this new math in quotation marks. And with those quotation marks, essentially what that means is they want to help their kids. That's what it boils down to. If we want to make sure that our kids and our families are being serviced, we have to be receptive. So you'll notice that the newsletter snippet that I have here, typical newsletter I would send out to families, Parent-Teacher Association, going to meet in the library, Tuesday, June 28th. Media Center, blah, 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 talking about becoming more engaged in science and math classes. Please bring your ideas. You'll notice this is only in one language, and that language is what? English. This is a barrier. We cannot engage families in the process if we're not meeting them where they are. And I understand completely that literacy and mathematics instruction is everybody's responsibility, including the families. But what I'd like for y'all to think about too is how families are currently being engaged. Because when I think about the PTA in this scenario, we really didn't have a lot of families coming up until we put it in Immersive Reader. So right now, again, I'm in OneNote. This is where I keep everything. What I'm going to do is go to View, and I'm going to go to my buddy Immersive Reader. It will take just a moment to pull up. There we go. And it looks like we are all good here. And with this, you'll see a couple of things. The first thing that you might pick up on is the fact that there are multiple colors here. I have all of my nouns that are purple. I do have all of my verbs that are gold. My adverbs are red, and also my adjectives are green. With this, there's a couple of different things we can do here, but the first thing I'm going to point out is that this can be read aloud to you. I'm going to make this nice and loud. There we go.
The Parent-Teacher Association is going to meet in the library on Tuesday, June 28th in the Media Center at Guardian Elementary.
Which is fantastic. So sometimes even as an adult, I don't like reading. Like I love reading, but sometimes I'm thinking I would love for that to be read aloud to me. This is a great avenue for that. On top of that too, you've got different voice settings. I like to keep mine a little slower for accessibility, but there are 2 voices currently that are available in the queue. We have female and we also have male at the time. So these are the only 2 that are available. And then if we also go to our text preferences, again, I'm a glasses wearer, so I do try to keep my text nice and big. We've got things that are nice and big for the text. I've also got kids that will make it very small, and they ask me if I can see it. My answer is always no, please make it big so I can see it. I always have spacing on for my accessibility, but you can also decrease if you'd like to. And then for font, I do tend to keep it on the default. If you've got students that might be challenged with dyslexia or anything like that, then essentially they can toggle back and forth. I'm not sure if you are up to date for those that are listening, but Comic Sans does have the opportunity to kind of help those that might be struggling with reading challenges, specifically dyslexia. I personally am not a big Comic Sans fan, but I do it for the kids. So I will have it on Calibri for me, Comic Sans whenever I work with kids. There's also various themes here, and this was a learning moment for me where I like to do things in dark mode whenever I can, because I just like the accessibility. And I had a moment with a coworker where I printed out this document, sent it over, and they said, why can't I see some words here? There are no words that are available here. And that's how we found out that red text on a black background was challenging. So I was able to modify and adjust based on all of that. And you will have some students, quite frankly, that just like all the colors. It's like I've got some, they're like, we love the pink. I'm like, listen, if you love the pink, I love the pink, whatever makes you happy. We also have our grammar options over here. So with those grammar options, you can add on syllables, which I always have. If you do work with littles, right, like grades pre-K through 3, this is really helpful. But I honestly think it's helpful for everybody, and I love it. We also have various parts of speech. We got nouns, verbs, adjectives, and adverbs. And with that being said, we can turn labels on or off. You don't have to, but I always like to keep the labels on, again, just for accessibility. And then we get to some of my favorite features. So I think we've all been in situations in schools where, maybe a parent is waiting on an evaluation for a student, but we need data to back it up. And we're trying to see what's going to stick. This has been really helpful with my special education students, and honestly, all my students, period, because we have line focus. So what line focus does is that it enables distractions, or rather minimization of distractions. So we've got line by line, and you'll notice it darkens everything around it. We've got 3 lines at a time. And then we also have 5 lines at a time. So when that happens, you can actually chunk out large pieces of text. And I want to point out real quick, because I got this question when I did this not too long ago, can this happen from the internet? And the answer is absolutely yes. So let's maybe take something from National Geographic. If you've never been on National Geographic, I love their education resources. Some of my absolute favorites. And we're going to go to the, resource library. My body is not adjusting too well from going to Florida to Washington. But let's say that we've got this encyclopedic entry right now, and I'm just going to copy paste from here to here, right? So I'm not doing all of it. I don't need to, but I'm just going to do a couple of paragraphs. What I can do here is an immersive reader. I might say National Geographic and name it. I am copy pasting about the art of storytelling. I love storytelling. And if we go to immersive reader, you'll notice that it's here as well. So what I'm saying is essentially you don't need to do this from scratch all the time. If you'd like to do this via immersive reader and maybe having a thing that you get from the internet, you can. So with that being said, let me go back to my family newsletter. Going to go to Immersive Reader. And I mentioned line focus, which we just had. We have our picture dictionary, but we are going to go ahead and translate. We have more than 50 fantastic languages for you to go ahead and peruse. And it was amazing when I was working with a teacher in Florida last week, where she was looking for Haitian Creole, and we did have Haitian Creole. Absolutely outstanding. Now, I will say that some of these languages you cannot have read aloud. So Haitian Creole is so new that right now it cannot be played. However, most of our languages do have the option to have it played aloud. So I'll go ahead and let's do Armenian. One of my best friends growing up was Armenian, and I always loved to do it because her mother used to come into school and do Armenian, right? Like she'd do all this literacy stuff with us, and we loved it. This is another one of those languages where you can't have it read aloud, but the reason why I say it is because you can toggle between the language that you translated and then also the original. So we got the language you translated, got the original. I'll go ahead and toggle to, let's do French. My mother believes that I'm fluent in French because she's fluent in French. I am not fluent in French. She did not teach it to me. However, you'll notice that I've got my French over here. I got my original over here. So I will sometimes do this with my mom as she's kind of toggling back and forth between languages. For certain languages that are here, and again, that's most of them, you can actually have it read aloud.
L'association des parents d'élèves se réunira à la bibliothèque le mardi.
Love it. And if you take a look, certain words will have picture dictionary. So we've got the foreign word in quotations because that's what I translated to. This is French.
Bibliothèque.
I've also got my English word that was my original.
Library.
And then all to the bottom, you'll notice that I have pictures that, again, put the picture to words. So I've got library, I've got bibliothèque, and then I've also got everything there. I love this tool. So it's not necessarily a math tool in a way that it makes like things simpler or maybe a little bit different when it comes to highlighting how math works. But when we involve families, this is crucial because oftentimes in math instruction, we do need to engage families in that process. Now, you might be wondering what I do to actually facilitate this. Here's what I do. The first thing that I would do is I actually have a sample section in OneNote for family communication. So for family communication, I would just open up a document and I would have it right here, right? This is the exact document that I have that I would give to students, parent-teacher association, meeting in the library, Tuesday, June 28th, da, 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 da. But essentially what students could do, especially if the school was one-to-one, is that we take this and then we would superimpose it and they would take it home and they'd be able to translate for their parents. The second thing that I would do, quite frankly, if I go back to Immersive Reader, and then if I go to Translator, we just do a simple print to PDF. So what I would do is I would do control, right, PDF, print to PDF, and then from there, I would have copies in my classroom or at the school as to what was going on there. So again, great way to engage families in that conversation because that's important. We're all responsible. It's not just on the shoulders of the teachers or the school. Families are responsible as well, but families can be responsible if they don't know. So I do find this to be fantastic for that. All right, going back to our examples. For our math tools, we got a lot of cool stuff here, but what I'm going to show you that I find to be really beneficial is just kind of the all up math tools that are in OneNote. I'm going to be demoing a one-step equation, but this could be utilized for littles and also for elementary. So if you have like basic addition, multiplication, division, that works. These tools also go all the way up to calculus. So if you have logarithms, matrices, we got you. And what I'm going to do is just create a page for a simple problem. So let's do maybe practice. Oop, it's making me refresh. There we go. So let's do practice. Get in there. Practice. I think I'm on number 3 right now, so I'm going to go ahead and do number 4. Okay, so here's what I find whenever I work with students. Oops. Make this nice and big for us. There we go. If I do something like, let's say question mark plus 3 equals 7. Students are generally pretty okay. Like they understand that the question mark is what needs to be fulfilled. They need to think hard as to what the question mark might be. And then they're like, okay, well, it's 4. If we do something like blank plus 3 equals 7, which we do at the elementary and early childhood level, right? Like what's missing, what needs to fulfill the equation. They're also generally pretty okay because conceptually they can think, okay, what's the blank, what needs to be done? Here's where the struggle comes. The struggle bus comes in when we say this, x plus 3 equals 7. And a lot of times students are very challenged. And part of the reason why is because we are now moving from concrete mathematics to abstract mathematics. So we have a challenge where, and again, I'm just grabbing stuff around my office. Let's say that we've got 4 pens or 4 Unifex cubes, right? That's kind of what's utilized. We need to figure out what it is in order to make it 7. Now, when you're working with letters, things get a little squirrely. So what I'm actually going to do is delete this because we already know how students operate in that space. And I've got this equation right here, again, simple one step, x plus 3 equals 7. For us in the room, what you might think to do, of course, is we're kind of subtracting 3 from 7, we get 4, then x equals 4. But you will have students, or you might have students rather, that will struggle with this. What we're going to do is highlight this equation. We're going to go to insert, and we're going to go to math. And these are where the fun math tools come up. So we already have our equation in very beautiful math notation. X plus 3 equals 7. And what we can do is we can actually select an action. Now, before I go to this, I'm going to go ahead and say, once again, not there, not there, here, not there. I'm like, I know I just did it, so I'll go ahead and I'll do another one. I'll do practice number 5. That when you actually do this, and the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I want to make sure that y'all have the most comprehensive view. This works across the board. Let's say like 2 times 3. Sorry, 2 times 6. I'll do that with the asterisk. Make that nice and big. And when I do that, I go to insert, I go to math. And when I go to math, you'll see that my actions are different. So depending on what you're trying to solve, it will give you different options from that. So right now for the multiplication, we can evaluate, factor, round, floor, and ceiling. So let's do number 5 actually first, since I'm already here. Let's do will factor, because this might be something that you see whenever you're in kind of that like late middle, early, like high school phase, where you're trying to factor all of this out and really what that looks like. So factoring kind of indicates to you what is going on in that space. We have 2 to the 2nd power, or 2 squared, times 3. If we went ahead and evaluated, it would give us the answer. And then it would also give us if we wanted the solution steps. A big question that I tend to get here is this cheating? And to me, the answer is no, because we as the educators are still in charge of the assessment. We're still in charge of how we evaluate students. This is just a tool to help. And how does it help? Here's how it helps. We're going to go ahead and go to my buddy again, Immersive Reader, and we can actually have this parceled out again in multiple languages. So let's exactly this time, let's see, let's do Italian. Filter by document. We've got our Italian over here, our original right over here. And we can even have it read aloud to us. Oh, my sound is off. 1 second, y'all. Let's go back here.
Passaggi della soluzione. Moltiplicare 2 e 6, ottenere 12. 12.
So we've got, again, we can do this in numbers, we can do it in words, we can do it in a lot of different ways. But I just love that versatility. Something else we can also do for versatility is that we can generate a practice quiz. So this is one of my absolute favorites in OneNote that you can actually do. And when you actually create a practice quiz in OneNote, here's what happens. We've already got our question that's right here. And actually, I will flip to practice question number 4. This is our 1-step equation. What I'm going to do is go back to the 1-step, select, go to math. I've got my actions, and you'll notice that my actions are different this time because I'm not necessarily evaluating, I'm solving for X. I'm solving for X, it will show the steps. Once again, who's here? It is my buddy Immersive Reader. So if I want to go and read along with my students or have them read through the steps, we can make that happen. And on top of that, we can generate a practice quiz. So this was one of my lifesavers when I would bounce into work, right? I'm right before contract hours start. I've got time before the kids come in, but I'm also doing other stuff. I'm answering parent emails. I might be meeting with my principal. I might be meeting with my department. I just don't have time to do practice for the kids, even though they might need it. And instead of taking that time to create that practice assessment, what I love about OneNote is that it creates it for me. So what you're going to do is go to create a practice quiz. And you can, so first of all, it makes me sign in because I have like a ton of Microsoft logins. So it's just verifying that I am on the right one. But you'll notice that for the number of questions for a math quiz, you can actually generate up to 20. I used to do this for warm-ups. So I would do maybe 2 questions. I would generate the quiz, and here's what happens. is that it generates within OneNote itself. When a student submits a response, the answers go directly to you as the educator or the leader or whatever basically role that you have. So what I really appreciate about this is that these questions are generated from what I have that is within my question. You'll notice I keep repeating this is a one-step equation. The two questions that I have, or actually one, so let's see, they are one-step equations. So this is a one-step equation. Now, this is multiple choice, so students can kind of click through and see that. But what you can also do too is enable My Buddy Immersive Reader, which is phenomenal. I've used Mastery Connect in previous districts where it can actually have it read aloud. This is similar if y'all are familiar with Mastery Connect, but essentially what happens is it gets read aloud to you in that voice, and then students can answer the question. Great accommodation for students that might need small group and / or a read aloud function. They can still come to you whenever there is something that is needed, but ultimately if they want to do this on their own, especially if they don't have that accommodation. Like I've worked with students before where they might not have an IEP or 504, but they will bring headphones and they'll just listen to the questions because it's helpful for them. And that's how we kickstart conversations about, okay, do you need more accommodations? How can we help you? How can we be in your corner? It is remarkable. All right, another remarkable piece of the puzzle is the math practice when it comes to word problems. So one moment as I go ahead and do the change of rule. All right, and we are okay with the screening. I see it as presented, so I think we're all good. So for word problems, part of the challenge with word problems for students is that they need to understand what the word problem is asking. And that can be kind of challenging, especially if we're considering the fact that we want for our students to be able to solve. So if we take a look at this word problem, to us as the adults in the room, this is either repeated addition or multiplication. Right, I'm baking an apple pie. The recipe recommends using 2 apples per guest. There's going to be 5 people that are coming over for dinner and dessert. We need to figure out how many apples I should get when I go to the grocery store. If you can believe it, I had high school students that really struggled with this. And part of the challenge was we need to know what it's asking us to do. And if we can't do that, then we can't solve the problem. But what can we do? What we can do is put it in My Buddy. Remember, Immersive Reader. So here's what I would do with my students. And I'm going to go ahead and translate this. Let's do, let's see, we're going to do Polish today. Let's do Polish. All right. So I got my Polish, my original. Polish, original. What I'd start out with the math problems that I was, excuse me, I would actually always isolate the nouns first. Part of the reason why is because nouns are what? They are people, places, and things. Nouns allow for us to identify what is going on in the story from a very tactical level. So when I would do this with students, my English speaking ones who were familiar with Mad Libs, they'd be like, Mrs. Thompson, this is like Mad Libs. And it does kind of look like that though, right? But when I take a look at what it's asking, now we can identify what's going on in the story. So here's what's going on in the story from a people, places, things level. Victoria, apple pie, apples, recipe, apples, guest, dinner, people, dessert, apples, grocery store. So this is identifying that I, Victoria, am the person. Apple pie is maybe what's going on here. We have guests that are also coming. Oftentimes in math, we have these kind of like words that will indicate, or should rather is the operative word, indicate to students as to what they should be doing at that time. For example, needs means that really somebody should be able to obtain something. If I need something, it means I'm getting something and bringing it back to me. However, if this just looks like mumbo jumbo to kids, they're not going to be able to solve it. So isolating the nouns first is very helpful. Then if I go to my verbs, oops, did not mean to turn nouns off. And also I'm going to go ahead and just make this theme nice and bright for us, is you will see that now I'm adding verbs into that as well for my word challenge. So not only is it Victoria, apple pie, apples, recipe, guest, needs, now I've got is baking, is trying, figure, recommends. So when you first start with the nouns and then you go to the verbs, right? You have those together. It just is such a great way to integrate the math with the literacy. And it shows that literacy is important in order to continue with math instruction. Once that's all said and done, I will absolutely turn on adjectives and I will absolutely turn on adverbs. I do this every single time I work with students. That way, again, we can identify what's going on in the problem, and it gives a time for them to process and also see what is going on within the problem. Because one more time, if this just looks like words, we're not going anywhere. If we can decode the words, then we can have a lot of fun together. Speaking of decoding the words, let's talk a little bit about my buddy, Speaker Coach. So this is actually a session that I'm giving tomorrow on using Windows in schools. One of my great colleagues, his name is Joe Brazier. His contact information via Twitter is here. I don't know if you all are on Twitter, but he's given full credence for me to say, like, this is what you can do. You can give my contact information out. So just make sure, please, if you want to contact him. He is a former special education educator and is now at Microsoft with me leading strategy on inclusivity and accessibility, and one of the best guys I know. I mean, he's just such a stand-up guy. But we do give a presentation together on using Windows in schools. And this is something that we would do to practice together. Part of the thing with math communication is that we need to be able to explain how we've done the math. And sometimes this does appear in things like projects and activities. And students can sometimes be a little bit shell-shocked because they're not entirely sure how this works in the realm of math. A lot of time public speaking comes from science or social studies or ELA. Very few and far between can I even think of my experience as a K through 12 student where I've had to do anything outside of small group to explain how I got to the math. So when I was teaching at the private independent school and we did a lot of work on building up math confidence with sharing and explaining, I would have loved a tool like this, which is Speaker Coach. And it does appear a little blurry on my screen, but what I'll do is just kind of walk you through it in case y'all can't see it. Essentially what it does is that it walks you through a rehearsal where you're talking to the computer, and then at the end of it, it gives you a detailed report as to how you've done. So where is this located, you might ask? What we're going to do is go to slideshow in PowerPoint, and you are going to go to Rehearse with a Coach. If you are in the app version of PowerPoint, so right now you'll notice I'm on the online version, it appears like in the third slot instead of all the way at the end. It is still there, it is just in a different place. So if you go to Rehearse with a Coach, you can actually rehearse live and see how you're doing with the rehearsing and the coaching. And you'll notice, that it does pick up on certain things like fillers. So are you using fillers in your work? Things like sensitive phrases. Are you using inclusive language? Things like, are you using like repetitive language? I very intentionally, at a session I did on Friday, overused the word like, and it caught up on it because it was using that repetitive language. Also, are you using the right pace, the right tone, the right pitch? You'll notice that it also, if you want to turn your video on and do that, gives feedback on body language. So it does give suggestions for more engaging presentations. If any of you are in any way interested on bringing presentations to life when it comes to mathematics, highly recommend Speaker Coach. I attribute so many of my students getting up in front of the classroom and presenting in front of their classmates to Speaker Coach, because I would call it what I refer to as challenge by choice. Challenge by choice essentially meant that you could chime in whenever you wanted, or if you wanted to just kind of hang back and present to a small group, you could. But at the end of the day, they could present. Out of my high schoolers, almost every single one presented. And I highly, highly attribute it, honestly, to Speaker Coach. I don't think they could have done it without that coaching, because even if you want to do it in like a partner group or maybe even in like a group of 6 kids, it can be intimidating. So it's just really beneficial to have that resource there. And then if we take a look at, I know I said this was math tools in OneNote, but we're going to talk a little bit about my buddy Forms, because I did bring Forms up when I talked about it with the math tools in the OneNote. If you are not familiar with Microsoft Forms, I'm about to blow your mind. So I am here. All right. We are on the main screen. This is Microsoft Forms. The way that I get to it is just forms.office.com. You'll notice that I've got a bunch of forms here, including practice quizzes and lots of different things I'm doing with schools and pre-service educators, which I love, love, love. I'm actually working with my undergrad alma mater on doing a series of just how these tools can help save teachers time, especially when you're a pre-service educator. It is so beneficial to just know what's available for you. So if you want to create a math quiz, you're going to go to new quiz. New form is for things like pizza party, who wants plain, who wants pepperoni. It doesn't grade. So quiz does grade. You're going to go to new quiz and you'll notice that we've got some fun stuff here and we can basically do whatever we want. So for the untitled quiz, let's do maybe one-step equations. Since we've been working with these, this is similar to what I showed you within OneNote. The only difference really is that now we're creating the questions to a degree, which I'll show you, versus them creating all the questions. So we have one-step equations, and then for the description, you can say like, please complete this warm-up to the best of your ability. Pretty simple. And what we're going to do is just add a new question and see what transpires. Add new. Now you can do, let's do choice first for multiple choice. So we just have general questions that are written here. If I want to say things like, what are the steps for solving a one-step equation? That is where I can kind of write my options here based on what I want for my students to respond to. Pretty typical multiple choice. I can also have point values here. I don't like doing more than 1 point per multiple choice because I don't know if a student selected it randomly or if they worked it out. So I just like doing one. Now, we want to do maybe a math equation here or maybe a math problem. So what I'm going to actually do is do the more settings for the question. And what I'm going to do is actually select math. And when I select math, you'll notice that there's an option at the bottom that says enter an equation. So for the actual question, what I'm asking for them to do, I might say, please solve the problem below. And then for the equation, you'll notice that when I have it, I've got the math notation that opens up. So as I mentioned before, we've got all the way up to the calculus level and all that stuff. What I'm going to do is I'll actually do, let's do a square root. So let's do square root of 64. Just so I can show you. I know it's one-step equations, but I do want to show you. So you'll see that it does have the option to add all of the answers. So you don't even need to come up with false answers or anything like that. You can actually add it in here and then modify and adjust. That way students can pick and choose what they want. Again, typically for simple questions. So if I have another question and I really want to enter an equation, again, let's do that x plus 3 equals, let's do 10 this time, one-step equation. I'll say, please solve the problem below. I've got my equation. And you'll notice again that it's got the questions that are here for me. So again, OneNote plus, right? So right now I'm in forms. I'm creating a form by myself. What I can also do is create a question, a new question, and you'll see that I've got some one-step equations that are already here for me. So this was amazing for me when I was working with students with just kind of math fluency, fact fluency. What it does is it actually recommends problems for you. So you can add these here, as many as you want. And again, it is your time saver. So once you add, you can go ahead and do as selected. And it just kind of deposits in where those answers might be for you. Please solve the problem. Please solve the problem. Da, 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 da. Love it. Another thing that I love is that if you want specific answers that are text-based, because again, if we're communicating that mathematical literacy, you might ask a question that says, how do you know, let's say that, and let's say like x plus 7, or sorry, x plus 3 equals, let's do 20. Okay, now what this doesn't do is it doesn't give you answers because again, I chose the written word option. But what I can do is make my own written word. So I can actually add answers, and what it will do is look for those keywords and those phrases and grade the students appropriately. So what I might be able to say for my correct answer is I'll turn on long answer and I'll actually turn off math right now. I'll turn off subtitles. And actually I think I was doing just a little too much. I was flying too high. So I'm gonna get rid of that, and I'm gonna do a text question instead. Add my answer, there we go. So if I say, how do you know that x plus 7 equals 20? Let's just start there. So I might say, I will subtract 7 from 20, and I arrive at 13. That is how I know that the answer is 13 for x. Add. When you add, this does give you a plethora of correct answers. So what it does is it searches for those keywords. And again, because mathematical communication is so important, it just makes it simpler for you in that regard. Love forms. So there's the forms option that's in OneNote. If you want to take it one step further and create your own assessments, highly recommend doing the math tools in forms. And again, how I got there is just that forms.office.com. All righty. Last thing that I want to highlight before we go ahead and turn it over to our questions are the fact that since we are talking about communication and assessment, in math, we have a lot of students that might be great orators, like they're oral processors, but when it comes to getting their ideas down on a paper, it can be a challenge. So this is where I love the different tools such as Dictate. And again, in OneNote, you can also do this in Microsoft Word. You can also do this in PowerPoint, but I do a lot of my stuff in OneNote, which is why the session is called Math Tools in OneNote. So I'm just going to call this Dictate number 1. There we go. And when I press this old-timey microphone that is off to the top right, what's going to happen is it's going to pick up on my voice. So speaking of, here's what it's going to be. Hello, everyone. Exclamation point. I am so excited to be speaking with you about math tools, period. My favorite math tool is the quiz feature, exclamation point. Thank you for being here today, exclamation point. So it stopped me. Now I will say this is, well, I stopped it. So this is a learned skill for students because when they want to dictate at first, they're like, woo! But you'll notice that when I said exclamation point, it took what I had. When I did period, it took what I had. It talked about like what I said, and it was fairly accurate. If you've got students that really struggle with mathematical communication, that dictate feature is amazing because then they can at least regulate what they are doing. You might also have some students who really want the opportunity to listen to themselves talk. That's where audio comes into play. So this is where there's an audio recording saved, but there's also the text. Warning, the text is not going to be as accurate as dictate. However, this is another good place for students to start because then they can pick up on language conventions. So I'll show you an example. All right, I think there we go. So right now the audio is recording what I am saying, and I am talking about math tools in OneNote, and thank you for being here. You'll notice that the conventions are not the same. You'll notice that the punctuation is not the same. But again, for students who are struggling, this is another really good place to start because instead of having to deal with typing and then editing, they can just talk and then try to edit out that way. So these are just really some great tools that I've utilized and leveraged within the space of math. OneNote, Forms, Immersive Reader. I mean, I do everything within this OneNote space because I think that it is so all-encompassing. And I'm just so happy that you were able to join me in this and in one of my passions. And I will turn it over to the folks from SETC for just any questions that we might have or anything that I can answer.
Are there any questions in the chat? Maybe not.
I do see one. It looks like they were just wondering where the recording would be posted.
Oh, that I believe will be on YouTube.
Okay, that's what I thought. Yeah.
Yeah.
And if you need their YouTube channel, let me see if I can bring it up real quick. Because so the first SETC that comes up is like the special toys. It's like a kids channel where they show toys.
Yeah.
Yeah, but our channel for SETC is located right here. So that's where you can also find the video that I just did on STEM and literacy with Microsoft. It's where you can find the one where I did something on creating inclusive math classrooms. It's a lot of fun. So just make sure that you check them out because they got a lot of good content. Okay, I see one that says, do students always have access to OneNote? Does the district have to purchase it? If you send me an email, which I'll go ahead and put that back up there one more time for us. 1 second, there we go. If you send me an email with your district, then I can find out your licensing. And if you don't have it, I will fix that for you. And again, this is my contact info. I am on Twitter at Victoria the Tech. And then my email at Microsoft is vithompson@microsoft.com.